One of the things about football is that it can transform lives in lots of ways. I've got a very positive story about footballing to tell you. Keith Mabutt is at the helm of the Street Soccer Foundation. It's using football to help young adults who are or are at risk of becoming homeless. And Keith is here to tell us more. How are you this morning, Keith, after that result?
Oh, good morning, Paulette. No, I'm good. I'm over it as of last night. But obviously very disappointing. But what a brilliant performance overall from the guys to get to the final. So keeping positive.
And for me, it was those young men, actually. There was a bit before, building up to the match, where they were talking about these young men who, from the age of 6 on occasions, were starting to play football and how football had transformed their lives and helped them to achieve their ambitions and their dreams. This course that you're working on then, how does that connect with young people and change their lives, Keith?
Well, I think that's it. I think football is a global language. It's the universal sport in that regard. It's the most popular sport in the world, and it's one that resonates with many people, young, old, male, female. And I think with us, what we're trying to do is use the sport as a real force for good. And so what we do is work locally and nationally all over the country, and particularly in Sheffield as well. We've worked with both the Sheffield United Community Foundation and the Sheffield Wednesday programme as well. So with both clubs, and we're kind of using the sport to attract young people because of their love and interest for the sport, whether they play it, whether they spectate it. And once we use that in such a good manner to bring them into our academy setup, we then start to kind of instill lifelong lessons around sort of resilience, motivation, confidence, self-belief, and take them on a real journey of transformation. And it's through conversations that ultimately change people's lives.
So they won't necessarily be playing football, but they will be talking about aspects of football that can have a bigger impact on us. Is that how it works, Keith?
So I heard earlier that you're not into football that much, Paulette. But
I'm not great with it.
But no, I mean, it's semi in part. I mean, I will be honest, the vast majority of the young people that come onto the programme do play, but it is there for those that maybe don't play that often as well. So it's not a case of it's a trial for the football club in that sense. It's certainly not that. But what it is, as I say, that they're brought onto the programme, and fundamentally through that kind of connection through the sport, that's clearly what breaks down barriers. That's what gets a conversation going. So particularly, obviously, on the back of last night, that could be an absolute conversation starter. For example, if an academy session was on today. So you'd straight away go into the game, you might sort of review it, analyse it, what went on, the highs and lows and everything else. And it gets people talking. And this is the key aspect of the programme, Paulette, that it's those conversations where we empower a youth voice to have that confidence to input on a discussion. And then the football is never present. So we, as a structure, very briefly, we give them 90 minutes of football coaching every session, every week, followed by a lunch. And then we have a kind of workshop discussion for 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the theme and obviously the input of the young people. But as the programme grows and develops week by week, it's a real coming together of these young people that they suddenly look forward to the conversations in the classroom more than the football, if that makes sense, because they can feel themselves progressing as individuals and becoming more confident and more believing in their own ability. And ultimately what we try and do at the end of every academy that we run is move these young people into work educational further training. And I'm very proud that we've got a very high successful level on that.
That's wonderful. Sounds really moving and practical and quite powerful, Keith. We're going to continue to talk about the Street Soccer Foundation, aimed at young people who are homeless or facing homelessness. Let's talk a bit more, Keith, about the circumstances that these young people find themselves in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, homelessness is obviously a complex issue. I think, people can become homeless due to a number of range of different personal circumstances, whether it's losing a job, unaffordable rents and housing, personal and family issues. And many of the cases, Paulette, that we find within the Street Soccer Foundation on a national level is from where there's been a relationship breakdown for many of these young people, whether it's a partner or in the family home. And because of that, they've often sometimes, whether they've chosen to actually go into a hostile environment or they've had to kind of be forced in one way to go into that situation. Many of them try and sofa surf as well. And what I mean by that, not to be flippant, is they'll maybe try and stay with some friends immediately, but then ultimately end up in some form of social housing or sort of temporary accommodation. But fundamentally, those that we support wouldn't necessarily be rough sleeping, and they may well have had, and many do have had, an experience of that where they've actually been on the streets, very sadly. But often and most regularly, people that are referred to us to join the academy programme with the clubs that we work with are referred in terms of the fact that they're in temporary or supported accommodation. So they're in a temporary situation. They've not got their own home, as it were. And it's whether they've also been kind of deemed at risk of becoming homeless. So like I said earlier on, whether they've just become unemployed or they might have been in a youth offenders institute and maybe long-term unemployed, that kind of thing as well. So we're taking those that they tend to be vulnerable in the sense of disadvantage. Maybe there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of their social connection to society, but they're very low typically in confidence, self-belief, self-esteem, aspirations, that kind of soft skills element where we're trying to obviously use football as the glue, as the attraction piece in the first instance, to then really hone in on those individuals and build up their confidence through conversations.
You talk about mindset training. Is this something that's going to get them in a position? Self-esteem's a big part of what you do, big part of what you're building up through these courses. Is the aim for them to be confident enough to live on their own, or what's the goal, as it were? We're talking about football, so we have to talk about goals, Keith, don't we?
We absolutely do, and I'd love, if I get the time briefly to mention the big goal as well, because it's a new nationwide campaign that we've launched in attachment to the Street Soccer Foundation. But I think what I'll say briefly, if I may, in terms of mindset is, if you consider from the moment you wake up until the moment you go back to bed, your mindset is the mission control center to everything you do. So it's what determines how you feel about taking on the day's challenges. It's your foundation for excellence, success in every aspect of your life. It's what ultimately sets you up for success or failure. So I'll give you one very basic example. So you wake up out of bed, you walk along the landing, for example, and then you maybe trip up on something. And then your reaction to that might be, oh, it's typical. I'm half asleep. What a day I'm going to have today. It's going to be appalling today. I'm going to be like this all day. Right? Or it could be, oh, blimey, I left that's silly of me. I'll put it to one side. Right, come on, let's get on with the day and get in that shower. So it's a silly little example, but you see, that's two different ways of reacting to a circumstance. And so if you have a kind of negative mindset, more so in that regard of the former I've just offered, that will challenge and the kind of channel the way you think and how you act accordingly.
Which could often be the case if you're facing homelessness or you've got circumstances that mean that you're homeless.
I think this is exactly it, because often, and there's no way to criticise it, but often what we do find is that many young people feel they're almost in almost like a victim mindset. They feel victimised in the sense of this is their situation, and so there's nothing they can do about it. And ultimately, their mindset encompasses how they see themselves, their place in the world around them, and it really does influence and shape everything about what they're about. Their kind of their health, their happiness, their energy levels, their aspirations, like I say. So often it is because of that football element, having this kind of football as a sport, as an attraction. They see. Let's focus on Sheffield. So with Sheffield Wednesday, they've just worked with us on their recent academy, so the Sheffield Wednesday Street Soccer Academy. So we use the strength of the badge, Sheffield Wednesday, in the community, and that will appeal to many. I know that not every part of Sheffield, but certainly there's many people that will be sort of attracted to the badge, and so they might give it a chance. And it's that initial kind of give this a chance and see what it's like that we're aiming for. And then when these young people come along to that first session, it's then once we've got them, we can really look after them in that sense of a care factor. We get in and amongst them as conversations and individuals and as a group setting, and show them that actually the easiest way to shift your mind from can't to can is to change the way you talk to yourself. And so it has to start within.
It sounds a little bit like what Gareth Southgate sounds like he's been doing to sort of mould that team together and to get those individuals to build the confidence they need, despite the fact that they're very talented. Often the self-esteem may not be very high, and he's done a great job on that. So for you then, before I let you go, I've got a couple more questions for you. How did you get involved in this, and why did you, Keith?
So thank you very much for that. I mean, very briefly, it was actually a radio interview that I wasn't on myself, but I was listening to it, and they started talking about homelessness and went on to youth homelessness. And I was at home and I just sort of locked into it, and I was just deeply sort of saddened and shocked to hear the statistics. And this was in summer of 2015. So I just sketched out the idea for street soccer there and then in the afternoon at my home, took it to the PFA, because I used to be a footballer myself. and just told the PFA, look, I want to create a project. I've called it the Street Soccer Foundation. I want to use football as a force for good. I want to onto a local club.
What's the PFA, by the way? Sorry, can I just sneak that in?
Forgive me, the Professional Football Association. Sorry for that. I went to London to see them guys, and of all the clubs, they looked after the South clubs. The guy I saw, and I got introduced to West Ham. Sat down with West Ham United and their foundation, the CEO there, and ultimately got a partnership in place, and we kicked it on. But ultimately, it was that when I learned about homelessness and young people being homeless, it was one of them that I didn't really I didn't get upset, as it were, but I was just really shocked, and I had this inclination and felt really impelled to want to do something about it, and that's the reason I sort of created the project, if you like. I had no intention, though, to be honest with you, to set up a charity. I just wanted to run a project and see if we could help a few local people. But it was that first ever program that we did, and the first guys that gave it a chance. The conversations that went on, it will stay with me forever, and you've got a responsibility then all of a sudden.
And you work with men and women, young men and young women, Keith?
We do, yeah, absolutely. So it's an all-inclusive offer, absolutely.
Wonderful. And if people are listening to this and thinking, well, you know what, this might work for me, or this might work for someone I know, can they get directly in touch with you, Keith?
100%, yes, and I'd love that. And any young person that's listening to this, 18 to 30, male or female, or even those that work with young people to support them in any capacity, whether it's, as I say, in a social working kind of environment or any form of support, casework, government service, please visit streetsoccerfoundation.org.uk. Specifically reference the Academy on the website, and that's the program that we're talking about. And there is final comment, if I may, Paulette. There's an initiative that we launched called The Big Goal. People can look into that, thebiggoal.co.uk. That's a way for any organisation, any people that work in a company, you can show your support as well and actually sponsor a local academy in your community.
Okay, that all sounds great. Keith, it's lovely to talk to you, especially after the crushing, sort of feeling that you get after the defeat, of England. And I understand you're quite superstitious, and we're in a particular place watching the match, hoping for success, but it didn't pay off, did it, in the end, unfortunately.
I know.
Well, Keith, lovely to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on BBC Radio Sheffield. Keith Mabbutt, who's founder of the Street Soccer Foundation.